Welcome to the Boone County History and Cultural Center Meet the Author program. Our goal is to provide conversations with Missouri authors and people who know a lot about Missouri. I'm David Weber. Thank you to our sponsors and to the staff of the History Center for making today's conversation possible. Our guest today is Bill Clark, who is from Missouri and knows a lot about Missouri. He graduated from Clinton High School in 1949. The title of today's interview should be something like A Writing Life. Most viewers from Columbia know him from writing several columns a week for the Columbia Tribune from 2004 to 2017. But he has written much more than that, from local theater reviews to international writing about Korea and about baseball and birding. He finally bought a computer a couple years ago and has an online column. Welcome, Bill. Well, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So tell me, how did you get started in writing?
I got started, I suppose, as a co-sports editor for the high school newspaper. That was the first place I saw my name in a byline. And then when I went to Korea in 1953, right just before the war ended over there, when I had grown up in Clinton, a fella from Clinton had written back stories about his experiences in the army all through North Africa and Italy and into southern France. He made all that distance without getting hit, which was a miracle. But I was intrigued by what he did as he sent those things back, those stories back to be published in the Clinton Daily Democrat. So I thought, well, they hadn't heard anything from the Army since World War II, so I thought I'd bring them up to date on the Korean situation. So I started to write about every other week. I probably wrote maybe between 20 and 25 different stories back from Korea. And as I read those today, and I've used some in recent columns, as I've used those today, I've concluded I was a better writer in 1953 than I am now. So, but anyway, that triggered me to look at the future. I had spent my early life working in a chicken hatchery, and I had no plans to go to college, but I knew I didn't want to go back to that chicken hatchery. So I decided I'd take the GI Bill. And it was a good GI Bill at that time. It really took care of you. And I brought my GI Bill to Columbia and decided I was going to be a journalist. So I enrolled in MU on scholastic probation because I was in the lower third of my high school graduating class, mainly because I worked all the time, didn't go to school. So I took the entrance exam here, so they knew where they would put me and fail me out later on. But I made 97th percentile, which put me in honors classes on scholastic probation. So anyway, I finished up in 3.5 years. And at that time, I was doing a sports column and a bowling column and covering Hickman High School, all for the Missourian. And then I left there and after graduating and went to Lexington, Kentucky to work as a sports writer for the Lexington Leader. And then came back here to Columbia to manage the Kansas City Star distributorship here. And when I landed back here in a business, I also then was able to pick up writing again and actually wrote for the Missourian after I'd graduated as they called me a graduate assistant, I think, but I wasn't enrolled in school. And and later caught on late 1960, caught on at the Tribune, first as a bowling writer and then as a sports writer and a columnist for them.
So,
That's how I got to here.
and you've always been very involved in sport activity as well as a writer. I remember, didn't you start the Labor Day marathon here in Columbia?
Yeah, I started a lot of things here in
Yeah,
Columbia.
yeah,
I was the founder of the Labor Day Marathon,
yeah,
and today that's the third oldest marathon on the North American continent.
yeah,
It still continues. I started the Columbia Athletic Club. I started the Columbia Track Club. Even things like the Columbia Diamond Council. I started that when I was in the recreation department here,
mm,
uh, and actually started the uh, the wildflower group here in town, the Hawthorne Natives
huh, mm,
and Native Plant Society, uh, and so yeah, I guess I've been around, huh?
yeah. And then, oh, I don't know what happened. Um, I know that you've written for a lot of newsletters for organizations like the Audubon Society and stuff. I mean, so this must all come naturally to you?
Yeah, I sit down, you know, yeah, 2 days ago on Tuesday, I had no idea what I was going to do for Wednesday's column. And I walked down, I'm in the basement. My wife says I can stay at home as long as I stay in the basement.
Oh,
But anyway, I came down the steps and I turned towards my desk and I said, you know what? I have no idea what I'm
mm,
going to do. And I sat down here at the computer. I bought this computer the day after my 85th birthday. Up to that point, I'd never had a computer, so I
mm,
never had one.
mm,
But I sat down at the computer, thought about it a second. I said, I got an idea. And it happens quite often. And when I have an idea, I just sit down and write. And I can write you 12, 1,300
so,
word column in an hour sometimes,
yeah,
depending on what the subject is.
yeah,
It just comes. And as Joel Vance said, do you know Joel Vance? He was a great
mm,
outdoor writer. For 30 years, he was the outdoor writer for the Department of Conservation. And he died in late November. Uh, he and I were past each other in J school. Uh, but he made a comment not too long before he died. He says, the reason I keep writing is because writers write and they don't know
mm,
anything else. They just write.
yeah,
So I guess I'm in that same web, caught in that same spider web of society, in that I have to write.
mm,
If it's a newsletter, I want to make it the best newsletter and so forth. And
yeah,
I've probably done a dozen different organizations' newsletters, set them up and get them started on the right direction and then move on to something else.
yeah. So, one thing that I remember is several of your columns in the Tribune on race relations, sometimes events, um, and then sometimes more biographical. And here in Columbia, local race relations are very important. Are you doing anything to preserve those columns or to collect them somehow and make them more available?
Yeah. Uh, Let me flip the page here just a second. I just finished and in the process of getting ready for publication about a 450 page book I call The Irreverent History of Weightlifting.
Uh,
And that's done now. Everything's done except the final editing and getting it ready. We've got it in pretty good shape now. My son and daughter-in-law have helped me do the technology. I took a year to write it. Now I'm about 2 days from finishing a book called How Not to Officiate. and
Uh,
that's a book about the crazy things that happened. I officiated for 40 years on the field and the floor and what have you, and it's a memoir of the crazy things that happened to you in about 20 different sports, and that one will be about half the size of the weightlifting book. And once again, my family's going to help me get that ready for publication. Up next is my book on recalling the interviews that I've had with, well, about 200, but I'm going to take 100 to start with. 100 of the uh, most important, uh, primarily African American people, citizens here in town that have made Columbia what it is. And in that original document, in the original book, I don't plan to touch on racial matters, on prejudice or segregation, and what have you. I want to feature those people that I have chosen, those particular citizens I have chosen. And I've visited with three different Black leaders from the past primarily. They're all 75 to 80 years old and older. I visited with them, and we've chosen about 100 that we would like to see people recognize as a group that have built the foundation upon which Columbia stands today. And I wrote many of those columns, and you would never know whether they were black or white. I wrote those columns as an individual, uh, and I think it's so important that before you take on the problems of race and what have you that we have in our society today, you must introduce someone not because of their color, but because of their accomplishments. And that's what I plan to do with this original book. I've got enough to do two of them. I've got enough to do probably 200 different people.
individual.
And it may take a little work here, and that many of those are dead, but some of them are still alive and still contributing. So those may have to be rewritten, and I may save those for the second book.
Right.
uh, but what I do with race relations, and I want to let's the problems we have in the society today of black versus white, of Latino versus gringo. Um, the That's a different story, and and I have written some pretty tough stuff in the Tribune that they ran through the years. I was surprised that they ran some of it because it was a condemnation of both blacks and whites. Uh, and
So,
uh,
do you do anything about like sharp end, or I guess you weren't here in the '50s when Douglas was when Hickman High School was integrated by moving Douglas. Do you talk about those sorts of events, or just
oh yes,
individuals, just people?
yeah. I tell you what, I ran a boxing club, and when uh, sharp end isn't basically it isn't as it's portrayed today as being a place where everyone partied and so forth. Sharp end got its name because there's the knife fights down there, the cuttings.
Mm,
That's
I
and
heard that before.
yeah, come on, let's face reality. It was a
Mm,
tough place,
mm,
uh, and it was only one block long.
mm,
It's where the parking garage is and the post office across the street. And that was it.
mm,
And when land clearance came in 1957,
mm,
that was one of the places that was condemned. Uh, and I was running the boxing club a year later, and we had a mixed group, about half white, half black. We had no home, and I had a good friend who was one of the land clearance directors, and he said, "Tell you what, Clark, we'll do you a favor. As we condemn these buildings, we'll not shut off the utilities, and you can use them for your boxing club." So part of Sharp End was still operating.
Ah,
Part of it had been condemned. We wound up at the only white business on the Sharp End was at the southwest corner of Sixth and Walnut, which was uh, plumbing company. It was owned by a white guy, uh, Bill Swanson. Well, they moved him out, and that was a good building. It was the best building on the block, basically structurally. So we operated in two places, the old Green, whatever it was, Green Lounge or whatever it was, on the opposite, down on Fifth and Walnut, and then we had to move out of there and went across the street, which is now the post office, with our boxing club, and the weightlifting club had started at the same time. So we bounced around between those two places, and then we wound up at Swanson's Plumbing, and we were in there a year and had a pretty good layout. Had a ring. Uh, there was a place next door that was still operating. And somebody getting a fight in there, the guy would send him over to the boxing club, and we let him finish him in the ring over there. And the kids, like, they loved to watch these drunks fight because they were terrible. And So we became a part of the tail end of Sharp End with our boxing club and the weightlifters. Uh, we had some problems in there. More than once, we locked the door on a couple of the thugs come in and wanted to raise hell in the place. We locked the door on them, just turned the boxers loose on them. That usually settled the issue pretty good. So, and I've been told numerous times that I covered Douglas High School in 1956 and 57. I covered their sports, and that was one of the best athletic teams that Columbia ever saw. Or
mm,
black, white, or polka dot. It was Rocket Richardson and Jack Rout and Montel Washington. You know, we can go on.
mm,
Moose Jackson, the whole bunch, and and uh, Sleepy Logan, who's still with us here in the community. Spent 40 years, I think, with one of the computer people. Uh, these guys went on to places later on in life. So by covering them, I got to know the families really
ah,
close.
mm, mm,
And I would go to their homes and so forth. And I've been told by many of the old people, most of them now departed, uh, that I was the only white person that ever came as a friend to their homes.
mm, mm,
Nobody else did.
yeah,
And I never gave that a thought. It never occurred to me.
mm,
After all, I found out when I was in Korea, there's no difference between me and a Korean, except a little bit different shade of our skin, but not that much. And Koreans had a double epicanthic eye fold. I have a single epicanthic eye fold, and so do you.
mm,
So they got one more eye fold than I got, and that one eye fold doesn't make a bit of difference.
mhm, mhm,
So, and without knowing it, I applied that same logic to my friends in the Douglas School area.
yeah,
And
mm,
after I came out of baseball in 2003, I looked at the situation here in town and I said, you know, this street problem is we ought to be able to handle that. In the past, there weren't many shootings. There were a lot of knifings, cuttings, but there weren't many shootings. And I thought, you know, we'll just open us a club someplace and invite everybody in. And then I found out something. They play with different rules today than they did
mm,
60 years ago.
yeah.
So I didn't become a factor after I
What
retired back here.
What do you think changed that? I mean, I've heard several explanations. One of them was that the growth of the University of Missouri, especially the hospitals, attracted more people than there were in the 50s.
Oh,
So that
sure.
so
I
that now our sense of community is much less than it was back then.
well, we had the black community. Let's say in 1960, when integration came to the
Yeah.
school system here. In 1960, we had basically one group of African Americans, black citizens, and they had come through the years, moved in from other parts of central Missouri, or had come out of slave families here in Boone County, and they were a very cohesive, big family. And then when they built the medical center, which would have been about 19, what would that have been? 1954, I think they started the medical center and to build a hospital. Uh, and Boone County Hospital expanded, and all of a sudden we didn't have enough workforce. So
Uh,
we recruited basically uh, black workers from the South, and they came in here, and they were sort of like our own people, except they'd grown up in a culture, and we had a culture. They really didn't mix too much.
mm, mm,
They and then later on, we had the the after Arthur Strickland became the first black professor here,
mm, mm,
we had a good number of outstanding black academics come to this community. But just like the whites at the university, they didn't cross Broadway too good.
mm,
So we wound up now with a smaller but a third group and of African Americans, and I felt like at that point we pretty much existed in three different worlds, but not at odds with each other.
mm.
And then came drugs,
Ah,
and uh, you know what happens when drugs come to a community. Uh,
so that would probably be like the late 1980s,
I would assume so.
about that somewhere in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't around here. I lived here, but I was on the road as a baseball scout for 36 years. So
Mm,
I missed a lot of that transition with the drug people.
yeah.
I thought at that time, we'd take care of the druggers. We'd take care of them in their own way.
Mm,
Just turn the people against them.
mm,
Well, that wasn't going to happen. I found out later on, but I think that's what caused a lot of the problems.
yeah. Mm,
And today, I don't even want to. I'm almost out of it as far as racial situations go. We've got just like politics, where we have Democrats and Republicans, and there's no in between. It's
yeah.
either me or thee. And today, I find the race relations to be exactly the same. There are a lot of us who reach out and hug and and consider no difference between me and thee, and then the other people say it's us and us only, and you're going to bow down before us.
Yeah.
That's the old plantation policy, but
Mm,
now it is the policy of too much, probably. Well, I won't even say drug enforced, just anger at the past. Well, the past is dead.
mm,
We buried it. We look
yeah.
to the future, and
Mm,
it irritates me considerably
mm,
when people that have. I really went after race matters friends. Don't call me friends when you don't want to listen to anything I
mm,
have to say. We can't be friends because you
mm,
drew the line.
mm,
And so
yeah.
I got some real strong feelings in that direction.
So do you think some of this is generational? The, I don't know, like maybe people who were brought up in the 60s are more like you and people younger are more confrontational?
Yeah, and I think they've been led to be that way.
Yeah.
We had a few leaders through the years. You go back, probably what? Go back 50 years,
Mm,
almost 60 years to the Black Panthers
mm,
and the real radical groups.
mm,
Well, the youth tended to follow them.
yeah. So,
How many youth followed Arthur Ashe, for instance?
mm,
Few, if any.
mm,
So that is, and I don't know how to overcome it.
yeah. No, it is interesting, and that's why I look forward to your collection of columns or writings on the historical figures that you have known. You know. Well, so have you paid much attention over the years to University of Missouri sports? I mean, like Phil Bradley, for example. Did you ever write about him?
Oh
I'm
yeah,
just curious.
yeah. I wrote about Phil Bradley. I
Oh, did
tried to
you?
sign Phil Bradley. Let's face it,
Oh, is that right? Huh.
and I love Phil Bradley. I thought he was. You talk about a headstrong guy, he can be that.
Yeah,
but but when you hit 300 in the big leagues, you can be a little headstrong.
yeah,
So
yeah,
uh, and he became, may still be, or maybe retired now. I lost Phil in the last couple of years, but he worked for the Players Union for years as a
oh, that's
trophy.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, oh yeah, and
No, I was just thinking of the earliest African American athletes from MU that I remember, and he was big before I came here, but I've always known about him. You know.
oh yeah, you go back to uh, yeah, Al Abrams was the first black basketball player to come here.
Oh,
Uh,
he's from Columbia?
no, he's from St. Louis,
Oh,
but
huh.
yeah,
But
we've had very few black athletes from Columbia that have gone to MU and
mm,
become real uh, all Americans, so to speak. There,
yeah,
our black all Americans seem to have come from other places.
yeah. But there's, if you're a high school athlete, the odds of you playing in a D1 school are not very high anyway, right? I mean, so the odds that someone would go from a Columbia school to MU would be pretty low.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
mm,
You find your own level in athletics. The same thing. When I was looking for guys to play pro baseball, you you didn't look at the just the uh, recreational programs. You look for the guys at the high level of play,
mm,
and
mm.
yeah.
So let me change the subject. Um, Over the years, I've also appreciated your writing on theater, especially local theater. Um, do you have an expertise in that, in the arts or in playwriting? And how did you get into theater?
I paid I paid to get in the theater
Oh,
most of my life.
uh,
uh, yeah, that is an interesting question.
uh, uh,
Uh, when I was at the Missourian back about 1956, I got assigned to cover some plays at Stevens College,
mm,
and one of the first plays I covered was Bus Stop, and it had been written by a former uh, uh, teacher at Stevens, Bill Inge.
mm,
And Bill Inge, he wrote Bus Stop, he wrote Picnic,
mm,
and some others that were hits on Broadway. And they hired Inge to come back and direct the play that he to direct Bus Stop. And he used his original script instead of what wound up on Broadway and the movies later on. And that I had no idea. I'd been in a high school play once when I was a junior, I think, in high school, and was scared to death on stage. I remember I had to kiss the leading lady and scared the hell out of me. So I'd never done that before, and now I'm in front of the public. but but anyway, uh, I got kind of caught up in theater a little bit.
Mm,
And through the years, I loved musical theater. I loved Broadway, what was on Broadway, the music and the stories. Broadway, to me, was the American opera. And people in Europe consider our musical theater to be our opera. Uh,
mm,
and I agree with that. But through the years, I would make write an occasional story about theater. Uh, and after I retired from baseball, actually I got fired from baseball for trying to start a scouts union. Plantation owners don't like unions among the troops, you know. But
right.
anyway, uh, I started, for whatever reason, nobody was really reviewing anything or making any comments about theater or other than basically rock music. Nobody wrote much about the classics. Nobody wrote about the golden oldies, Broadway shows of the past, and so forth. So I just kind of fell into that role
Mm,
and enjoyed it. And then it got to the point where if I hadn't come to see a show, a producer or director would call and say, "You haven't seen my show yet." So I'd lie to him and say, "Well, I got it on schedule." and uh, and I really got caught up in classical music.
mm,
Uh, 2 nights ago, I sat here at my desk, and I always have classical music on behind me. I got the university's classical station; never changes here in the house. It
mm,
stays there 24 hours a day. Uh, and they played the César Franck Symphony in D minor, and that's the very first symphony I ever heard.
wow.
And I got caught up with that thing because in the middle, one of the themes in the first movement is Yale's Whiffenpoof song. And
Mm,
I said, Frank stole that song from Yale. Well, I think it went the other way around,
mm,
but anyway,
mm,
I got caught up with that, and I was in the army in Texas.
mm,
And the San Antonio Symphony came to San Marcos Air Base, where I was doing it was in a school. First time I'd ever heard a symphony. First time I'd ever heard a symphony orchestra.
mm,
I thought classical music was for somebody that I just wouldn't go. And it just the power of a symphony orchestra just sort of grabbed me, and it stayed that way. So I love the Missouri Symphony. I love the Odyssey concert series here,
yeah.
and I've made it a policy to only cover and only attend and cover what's in Central Missouri. I don't care who comes to Kansas City. I don't care who comes to St. Louis. Somebody say, "Oh, you need to go to St. Louis." I know I don't need to go anywhere except to Columbia, Missouri, because we have here an amazing
Mm,
amount of talent. Uh, it's almost like we have too much
yeah.
talent because we've got so many theaters. I actually buy seasons tickets and usually make a donation on top of that to 16 different entertainment groups here
Wow.
in town or around. That's all the way from Macon, the Maples Rep Theater in Macon to Lyceum to
Mm,
the Dinner Theater in Jeff City. I usually try to make every high school play.
mm.
I don't do
That's what
their
I remember.
music because I don't have enough time. But to make all the high school plays, all the
Mm,
college performances, and then everything else in town, the theaters here, Maplewood and and Columbia Entertainment and the Talking Horse and you name it. I try to get to every one of them. And
mm,
I'm out about 100, between 125 and 150 nights a year, just listening to and covering entertainment.
uh, So, is there any topic that you've not written about? Um, right, I guess we haven't talked about your birding, your no, not aviation, birds,
Yeah,
ornithology. So I've learned a lot about them too. But you seem to take a trip every week.
we go every Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yesterday we were out. I left home at 7, got home at 8 last night.
Wow.
We went into Phelps County, went down below Rolla, went to one of the most secretive places you can find called Mill Dam Holla Access, and couldn't get in. We got right to the edge of it and couldn't get all the way because the low water crossing was lower than I
Wow.
was going to try in my car. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I got involved with that uh, as a sports writer at the
Mm.
Tribune. One Saturday morning, a bunch of women came in and they went to the city editor and said, "We demand a story about the Audubon Society's Christmas bird count."
Ah, okay.
And they had all of this statistics here on the Christmas bird count in Columbia. And the managing editor looked at that and he says, "Well, that looks to me like a sports story." And he says, "Go see that guy right over there." And that was me.
Ah,
So they brought this over, and I was intrigued by it. They had we have a Christmas count here, and it's a circle. It's 12 and a half miles in diameter,
mm,
and it done anywhere in 2 weeks around Christmas. So I decided I would go on this trip with them, and I got caught up.
mm,
I got caught up. I tell people I talk quite often about birding and birds, and I tell people that if I've never been there before, it's only good once. That I only knew 3 birds before the day that those people came into the Tribune. I knew I knew Thanksgiving turkey. I knew
oh, yeah.
I knew Christmas goose, and I knew
Yeah.
Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that was it. And that
Yeah.
basically was right.
Ah,
So, and then why, why? I tell you what, birding, it was intriguing. I mean, it
yeah.
just caught me. And before long, I noticed that I was not only looking up into the trees, but I was looking on the ground at the
Mhm.
wildflowers.
Mm.
So that caused me to organize the Hawthorne Native Plant Society here
I
in
see.
Columbia.
Ah, mm,
And I've been president, my wife's been president of the Audubon Society
mm,
here. And in 2001, I wrote the 100-year history of the Audubon Society of Missouri.
mm.
And so that's one of my major publications, of which
So,
there are very few.
yeah, where would I find that?
Uh, the Audubon Society had copies of it, but I
Mm,
think they sold all those out years ago. I got I got 2 or 3 copies around here
mm,
in the jungle back over here
mm.
that is allegedly my library.
Would the public library have it? Have a copy?
I don't think so. I think the county historical society's probably got
Or do
a
they? Huh.
copy,
Yeah.
and I'm
You
sure the
know,
state historical society does.
yeah. Because one of my concerns is making sure that local history is preserved. Um, and I, I don't know if I should name anyone, but there's a gentleman we both know who knows a lot about housing policy here in Columbia, and he has photos and maps and stuff. But you know, he's retired, and we need to see that that information is maintained someplace.
Yes, and he had a running mate who will remain nameless now, who had a lot of local black history,
Mhm.
and that stayed in the family, and it's not shared. And
Yeah.
I found that as I worked through as I wrote a lot of these columns about black people, I found that there was a strong distrust of, and rightfully so, of black people refusing to share their family heirlooms and what have you with white people.
Yeah.
And I understand that thoroughly. And I thought maybe in some of the case or two like this, where I could say, well, let me help you find the place. We've had problems that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
No, I can understand that too, and that's why I think maybe the public library or county historical society or someone should let them do it, their way. They don't
yeah,
have to give it to me, Well,
yeah.
anyway, so let me ask you again about, are there any topics that you haven't written about? I mean, I'm thinking of, oh, food columns and religion columns, columns that I've seen in newspapers over the year. Historical art or art. Have you ever written about art?
Uh, well, let's go back to food.
Yeah.
Uh, I usually eat everything that won't eat me.
Oh my God.
So I've done. I wrote 7 columns, and birding is involved here. When we go out every Wednesday, there's got to be a lunch someplace.
Ah,
So we started. Uh, we now have small town restaurants, not big, not where you're going to take your boss to lunch, but where you're going to take your buddy to lunch in a small town, whether that's Sturgeon or whether that's Washburn down on the border, or whether that's who knows where, Unionville up north. We have eaten in restaurants in all 114 counties.
ah, mm,
And I have a list of about 200 of those that I would return to.
mm,
And I wrote 7 columns in the Tribune
mm,
about these small town restaurants. And there are a number of people who collected them all and carry them in their cars. And when they go out around the state, they go visit those places.
mm,
So Joel Vance was one of the guys who really was on my case about, you need to do a book about this.
mm,
And just about the time, about 2 years ago, I got all excited because Joel kept pressuring me. And I said, okay, we'll do that. And then the pandemic hit, and that took away, uh, that closed many of the restaurants.
yeah,
I think most of them have reopened.
mm,
Most of the ones that we go to have reopened. But yeah, I would love to do a book in which I would say, okay, this restaurant in let's say Cahokia, way up in the northeast corner of the state, Clark County. Uh, the Cahokia had a nice family. It used to be called Steve's. It's changed its name now. Steve's Family Diner. And I would relate that Steve's Family Diner to whatever the best birding spots were in that part of the
I
state,
see. Mm,
and do about maybe 60 or 80 of those restaurants, and tie them to birding. So do 2 things at once.
oh,
So yeah, I've written about food. I've written about kimchi,
oh,
uh, and some other things through the years.
mm,
But I'm not a cook
mm,
and don't plan to be,
mm,
uh,
mm,
as long as I got a can opener.
yeah,
So
mm,
uh, you asked me about something else, religion.
yeah.
I've written. I had. I was the program director for Forum at the Unitarian Church for 15 years, and my wife did. She had the social side, and I had the program side.
Mm,
When the pandemic hit, we that folded up.
mm,
Uh, The church still is on Zoom, but not face to face. And this was basically aimed at people of various age, older people more. And it was an open. It had nothing to do basically with religion, although we did approach religion several times. It had to do with community issues. I'd bring in people from the local government and what have you, and that worked pretty good. I'm a Unitarian. I grew up a Southern Baptist. When the minister told me that a vote for Kennedy was a vote for the devil in the White House, no, the Pope in the White House and the devil in Washington, I said, well, I'd rather have that than Richard Nixon. So I left the Southern Baptist Church and became a Unitarian and remained there. My family grew up in the Unitarian Church. And I wrote a lot about it. It seemed like about every 4 months I'd write a column about something that happened in Forum, something in the Unitarian Forum, where I'd bring in a program, and it would catch the fancy of the people in the forum. And I'd say, well, this needs to be a community-wide thing. So I'd write a column about that. And so that's my relationship with religion through the years. My wife and I are the oldest continuous members of the Unitarian Church here in Columbia.
Is that right?
Yeah, we've been there longer than any of them. And you asked me about something else.
Art.
Oh, Art. I have a good friend named Art. I had two of them named Art.
Well,
That's about the extent of my. I can't. I tell you, I'm so bad at drawing. I can't draw flies. How's that?
yeah.
And I really have a problem with art and with museums.
Huh?
It's art I can handle better than museums, but
Mm.
museums are dead.
Mm.
And as we said earlier on, let the dead past bury its dead.
Yeah.
It's nice to go to a museum. You only go once.
Yeah.
You only go once. You don't need to go back. It's not going to change. They may change the exhibit in the museum, but it's still dead. So my whole philosophy in writing and in life is today is the most important day. The second most important day for me is tomorrow.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
And I'm going to try what I can to make today and tomorrow better by remembering the mistakes of the past.
Yeah.
And
So, we only have a couple more minutes. Let me ask you about one other topic about teaching writing. Have you ever taught, tried to teach how you write, or give people tips about it?
I just finished 20 weeks on Zoom at Osher.
Ah,
If you can believe this, a guy who only had got a computer 3 years ago, I did 20 weeks on Zoom for Osher. I did 8 weeks of creative writing, and then I did 12 weeks of memoir writing. And this is not the first time around. I first did writing classes for Osher in 2005 when it first started.
wow.
I was in the first several months of Osher's beginning. I actually taught writing classes out there and did it for like 5 years. So I don't know that I passed on any information. I don't remember seeing any of those people ever win a Pulitzer, but we've had fun. And this last 8 weeks I did with Osher, what fun it was. I had people from upstate New York. You know, Zoom allows you to be anywhere.
Yeah.
I had them in Minnesota and Chillicothe, upstate New York, Marshall, and what have you. People who were taking the Chillicothe, I said, they were enjoying these courses. And most of them were published writers. And it's fun putting myself on the line with those published writers. I said, geez, some of them had PhDs in English, and I'm saying, I barely got out of high school, and got a BJ, and now I'm the guy.
So, do you get any ideas for change or to improve from these people? I mean, does it cause you to think about what you do or?
Well, I try.
Mm.
What I do is I send them a column or two that I just written, and I say, now before every class, I said, tear it up,
Oh, good. Yeah.
and I don't know whether they're afraid or whether I actually wrote something decent
Yeah.
because they don't tear up much.
Yeah.
But it's and my wife got on my case. She says, you everything you're doing, you don't need to be doing an 8-week Zoom class. And I said, well, you know what? I really enjoyed it.
Huh.
I,
Mm.
I what little I would do, I would read their stories. I didn't try to change their stories. I didn't try to change the direction they were going. I just say, hey, look, let's take these two sentences and put them together. Let's
Yeah.
take 20 words and make 8 out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had 4 people do all 20 weeks. I had 5 people do all 20 weeks. Uh, and they were much at least 3 of those 5, 2 of them were accomplished to start with. Nothing was going to happen with them other than just push them to write more. But 3 of those 5 made a huge difference between week 1 and week 20.
Huh.
They learned to combine their to
Mm.
eliminate. Joel Vance used to say, if you wrote 1,000 words, rewrite it and give it to me in 600.
Yeah.
So I'm a little more liberal than that. Let's say 850. but and I felt like that what little I did to correct their writing by shortening it a little bit. And I hate the AP for taking commas out of our life, so I put the
Oh, that's good.
commas
Yeah.
back in with these people. So
So the thing that, when I've tried to teach writing, um, the thing that I've tried to improve the most on people is the first couple sentences.
oh
That
yeah, the
confuses people.
lead.
Yeah, the lead. Yeah, the lead. See,
I
I don't
and that
even I don't even know those technical terms, but
you know
yeah,
the lead is the lead
yeah,
and the wrap up are the 2 most important things, and they have to
yeah,
be related. They have to be related, and
yeah,
what you put in between makes the lead and the wrap up. But if
yeah,
that lead does not cause somebody to want to read the next paragraph, then you have failed as a writer. And I don't care whether that is a novel or whether that is
yeah,
a 200 word story, news story.
yeah,
The lead has to lead.
yeah.
And
So,
would I would draw a line around a soft lead, and I would put big exclamation points on a good lead,
yeah, yeah,
and push this hard, hard,
yeah,
hard.
yeah,
That the lead is the most important thing. Might be 1 word, or it
yeah,
might be 25 words, but it has to cause the person to want to read the next paragraph.
yeah.
And
So, then there's one other topic I wanted to ask you about, but we are running along on time. But that is, so I know you have 5 children, and
got 5.
several seem to be interested in similar things as you, the theater and writing.
Yeah. Well, our oldest son, Sean, he's the only MU student to ever win the National Collegiate Playwriting Contest.
Is
And
that
he
right?
wrote a
Huh?
thing called 11 Zulu, which after he got out of high school, he went in the army for 3 years in order to help pay for his education and so forth. And he was in Hawaii, and he was involved in bringing Vietnam veterans back into regular life. And he heard a lot of stories, and he used those stories to
Huh?
come up with a thing called 11 Zulu, which won the national contest and got him a job for about the next 15 years or so in Hollywood as a
Hmm.
screenwriter. And now he teaches that in graduate school at UNLV, University of Nevada, Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Our second son, Mike, probably is the one who isn't hasn't published much as a writer, but he spent 5 years in the Peace Corps and Carry International, and wound up he and his wife that he met in the Peace Corps, who's helping me with books, or his wife. Uh, she's a published writer, so uh, but Mike is they ran a Quaker retreat place in just south of Albany, New York, for 20 years.
Huh?
And after
Hmm.
20 years, they decided to change directions. And now Mike is a middle school teacher in Kansas City, Kansas.
Huh?
And his wife comes once a week. In fact, as we're talking up, she's upstairs right now.
Huh?
But uh, and then Kelly, who's run into some physical problems that basically keeps her out of the workforce. It was our first daughter, and she was an editor for Walsworth Publishing
Hmm.
up in Marceline, and was involved with several books. One written by Bob Bragg, and a sports writer out of St. Louis, and a number of things here. And 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 then Carrie. Uh, well, she's not known for writing, but she had 3 years in the Peace Corps
Hmm.
in Mali in West Africa. And now she is the international director for CAFNR, the College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources at MU. So she's pretty good at writing reports, at least.
Hmm.
And then Casey, our youngest one, he and a friend have written, I think it's 3 books on game playing, role playing games, and so forth. It's a world I have no idea about.
Like social social psychology or more
No, no, just
gambling
games, just
games?
games, role
Huh?
playing games. Oh
Huh?
no, no, there's no social psychology involved here,
Huh? Huh?
although there probably is, but it's
Yeah.
not published anyway.
Huh?
So yeah, and my wife's not a writer,
Yeah. Huh?
so
Huh?
in
Well,
fact, she doesn't even read what I write because she doesn't
well,
agree with it most of the time.
I know it's hard to find supportive writers. I know. Well, Bill, I want to thank you for giving us your time today. I've been looking forward to having this discussion with you for some time since I first started reading you in the Tribune. So, well, thank you very much.
It's been an honor.